actual documentation in the Linux kernel, the documentation directory about these options, I find this option, accept RA, which defaults to 1, and if you set it to 2, it will both accept router advertisement and allow forwarding. So, with that, with those 3 lines, if I run OpenVPN, you'll see a bunch of stuff. It's connecting. Hopefully, it might not actually connect over this network. Doesn't look like it's actually going to be able to connect. I'm guessing they're filtering outgoing port 53, which is a problem. I will actually have full connectivity by having releasing the OpenVPN on multiple ports, TCP and UDP. Possibly through an HTTP proxy if it actually is doing deep packet inspection. So that's not working, and my MiFi wasn't working either. But the point of this, if I could actually get it to connect, I'm going to try connecting to the MiFi again.
So the point is that
once I get an IPv6 address up, I can SSH into my development desktop at home, to my file server at home. I believe Chelsea is using this in the same way. I have access to my entire network, and because the Hurricane Electric client that he was talking about that's in the router, which in my case is an ASUS, updates that information every time my IP changes, then it just always works. It's better than running a dynamic DNS because I can get into a specific machine without any intellectual overhead.
We've got purple blinking going on, whatever that means.
Purple blinking?
Yeah.
Well, the other nice thing is that depending on how nice your router is, if you're doing port forwarding to like an internal server, so let's say you run a web server that's default port forwarded to over IPv4, depending on your router, that doesn't always work because basically your DNS will point to its external IP address. And some routers will get very confused when an internal IP tries to connect to the external IP address. Instead of forwarding it back, it just craps.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, so that problem disappears with IPv6 because every address is local.
Yes. Well, or if you have even if you have a Hurricane Electric client, there's no NAT, so you just hit the direct IP. It's inside the network, and it's no issue. And that's how my network kind of works at home.
So anyway, just as a pointing question, because I'm actually in, the connection just went down again. So this works in all cases except when the network is really spotty because you're inside a building and the building's own connection blocks 53, which is probably a perfectly reasonable thing since people run VPN software over it. So next month my mission will be to have OpenVPN running on TCP and UDP on a good arrangement of ports.
One other thing, since I just saw ping 6, you cannot block ICMP v6 because it is actually required for networking.
Yeah, actually, he brings up a good point. So ICMP, especially network security guys that tend to go a little bit too overboard with blocking things, you cannot block ICMP v6. Doing that is equivalent to blocking ARP, because ICMP6 is used basically for the same purpose that ARP is in v4. So don't do that.
What about my rainbow deny and reject?
You can do that for external to your network. Don't go so paranoid that you lock down all these switches from everything.
So if I've got a client that's got, one of those dynamic DNS things that, a dynamic IP at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I set them up with if they've got a new router, and I set it up with the IPv6. And I can just go in their host file and put the IPv6 of whatever they're trying to connect to at home in there, and then they never have to worry about it again.
What do you mean?
Because it would connect the same inside and outside.
Oh yeah, so what
You
you're
would have
saying,
to set up IPv6 statically.
with that setup that I just did, if you do that setup I just did, that is static. That's a specific case I have for this, is setting up, I would set up a VPN at a remote site that is an IPv6 VPN with a public address, And then you could just set up a DNS record for that on anything.
Even
you
though
want.
they're on a dynamic v4.
Yeah, you have static. You can have static v6 with dynamic
The
v4.
only issue with the dynamic v4 is if it's carrier grade NAT, it won't work.
But
And-
the VPN thing I just demonstrated will circumvent
Yes, the
that.
VPN will work. And also Hurricane Electric requires you to authorize the IP every time it changes. So you probably have to write like a wget script to go ping them and tell them that my IP address has changed and to reauthorize it. Because they're using source ingress filtering so that other people can't hijack your v6 subnet on you. The tunnel's established.
Is that like equivalent to DNS rebind attacks?
I would venture it would be.
Oh, so yeah, that worked every time during your presentation. The whole time I was browsing around, I had my thing, which is nice. It ends in double colon 1000. There are some caveats with OpenVPN's IPv6 support, but it was the easiest thing I could get running, and I did it before I traveled recently because I'm like, I need to be able to get in this stuff.
I just wish more devices support OpenVPN out of the box.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them seem to only support the old Microsoft VPN stuff.
Yeah, which is insecure.
Yes. Extremely insecure.
Chap, well, it's not that part. It's the underlying chap 2 is vulnerable to everything. All right, those of you that are new, some of us are probably going to.